Hello, BookTube. Matthew over at Mayberry Book Club and I have been turning his channel name into a reality for quite some time now. We've been having a little book club of two where we pick a book or a series of things and read it together. Uh, and usually it's a pretty quick discussion. I think the pattern that usually holds, in the past anyway, has been that I would pick what we read based on something that I think Matthew might find interesting or challenging or brand new. This time around, for April, he did the picking. And he insisted on it even after I told him that what he was leaning towards picking was, in fact, a bad idea. He said that he was having a hair-tossing, foot-stomping diva moment and would not back off from his choice. So, in the month of April, we are going back to something on which we've had a great deal of success, which is reading graphic novels. And the graphic novel that he chose over my objections was this one, Avengers Forever, by Kurt Busiek and with artwork by Carlos Pacheco. This is a 12-issue miniseries, so we will be doing 3 chapters every week. And if you look at it, you might think, well, what? It's a big adventure of the Avengers. How bad a choice can that be? But it's not just that. And it reminds me, thinking about this video for the last couple of days, has reminded me of one of the foremost duties that I have for my job. Those of you who are new to my channel, I am a professional book reviewer. And one of the duties that I have for my job is to bring my readers up to speed on whatever it is that I'm reviewing. It is absolutely not only dirty pool, but the mark of a rank amateur to just dive in feet first as if your reader knew anything about what you were talking about. Most editors wouldn't allow it anyway, and most reviewers just by nature don't do it anymore. Your first duty as a reviewer is to summarize the thing under review. Bring your reader up to speed so that they know what you're talking about before you start weighing in on what it does right and what it does wrong. And when I have weighed that duty against this graphic novel in terms of talking to you about it, I have seen only the low-hanging clouds of despair, because this isn't just a big Avengers story. This is the ultimate love letter to die-hard, long-time, criminologist Avengers fans. Avengers who've been writing letters on typed paper and putting them in envelopes with stamps and sending them to a New York address since the 1960s. Avengers who since the 1960s, when the Avengers premiered as a comic book, have been earning no prizes for spotting flaws in continuity. This is for those readers. Kurt Busiek was one of those readers, and he is writing this thing for those readers. This is in no way accessible to anyone who's not in that position. It is no way accessible. Now, you might think, from what you've heard me talk about books in the past, that makes it a bad book. And maybe it does. Maybe it makes it a bad graphic novel. It is largely revered, but largely by people who were those readers. I, for instance, am asked all the time, what's a graphic novel that you could recommend to me? And a part of me always wants to recommend this because it's fantastic. But it would be incomprehensible to a reader who was just diving into it feet first, as Matthew has done. Matthew does not have a lifetime of reading comics at all. And I predict will understand only a bare, tiny fraction of what he's reading in this graphic novel he insisted we read together. As a little bit of insurance, as a little bit of help, he and I snatched Michael K. Vaughan out of the time stream and drafted him into taking part in this read-along. Michael has a considerably more comic book reading experience than Matthew does. Just hasn't been there from the beginning, and maybe hasn't read it encyclopedically, talmudically, as it were. Matthew and Michael should be making videos today on the first 3 issues of Avengers Forever, but I wanted to make one of my own and do my best to fulfill that reviewer's duty of somehow orienting you and bringing you up to speed. It's not going to be easy. Let's start at the beginning. Okay, the Avengers as a team, at least, is an element of this graphic novel on which you do not need to be brought up to speed. The Avengers movies have made multiple billions of dollars for the movie studios, and everyone in the world as a result now knows what the Avengers are. They're a super team. They're a Marvel Comics super team. Everybody knows that. So I don't need to explain that. But the Avengers were brought together. They have a terrible, rotten, stupid origin story, and they were brought together by a kid, a greaser, a punk, a sock hopper named Rick Jones. Doesn't have any superpowers. Never gets any superpowers that he manages to keep because he's such a loser. He gets on his ham radio with his buddies somewhere in the Midwest. And they put out an all-points bulletin. Hey, you super people that I've heard about in the Daily Planet when it gets here to the Midwest 2 days after publication. We've got a problem here in the Midwest. We could use your help. The super people respond. Thor, the immortal Norse god of thunder, responds. Iron Man responds. And so does Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man is Hank Pym. He is a biochemist. The Wasp is Janet Van Dyne, who was originally a flighty heiress who is his girlfriend and then his wife. But Janet Van Dyne as a character, as the Wasp, grows as a character, deepens as a character, wonderfully so, over the course of many, many decades in Avengers continuity. So she starts off as a ditzy little nymphomaniac, but she becomes a formidable figure, an original team member who leads the team in several runs of the Avengers later on. At the beginning, in that first origin story, Hank Pym has the ability to shrink to ant size, and so does Janet Van Dyne. When he shrinks, he's ant-sized and can communicate with ants through the cybernetic circuitry in his helmet. When she shrinks, she grows wings and can fly as the Wasp. Why he can't? I have no idea. Why he doesn't fix his own formula so that he can grow wings? I have no idea. Unless it's that Stan Lee thought that women bugs have wings and male bugs don't. He probably did think something like that. He chucked a lot of cod science into his stories, but he managed to go to a ripe old age knowing precious little about science. But one way or another, those characters do hurry off to somewhere in the Midwest because a teenager has asked them to, and they fight a rampaging Hulk and then draft the rampaging monster to be a member of their team, the Avengers. That is the founding membership of the Avengers. Near bestial, homicidal maniac monster, who they somehow think is a good idea as a team member, then the immortal Norse god of thunder, Thor, Hank Pym and his socialite wife, and Iron Man. And they sort of let Rick Jones become a sort of adopted mascot. He's never actually part of the team, and why would he be? All he has the ability to do is doo-wop his hair. And after a few issues of the Avengers, Stan Lee had a stroke of genius. He reintroduces a character that his collaborator on the Avengers, Jack Kirby, originally created during World War II, Captain America. Again, needs no introduction. He has been immortalized on the screen by Chris Evans. Go Massachusetts. So nobody needs to be told or brought up to speed on who Captain America is. He's introduced early on in the run of the Avengers and becomes such a mainstay of the team that it's almost like he's a founding member by default. The Hulk quickly leaves the team, and it's almost like the team was founded with Captain America. They weren't, but it's almost like they were. And he has many, many adventures, but after only a handful of those adventures, Thor and Iron Man and Hank Pym and the Wasp all decide to leave. They all decide, well, see you later. I'm done with this team thing for now. And Captain America has to build a new team. And he does. He doesn't go for a big crowd of people. He replaces 4 members with 3. Quicksilver, the Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye. All 3 of which, again, thanks to the Avengers movies, do not need an introduction. Hawkeye is a former criminal turned crime fighter who uses trick arrows. He has great skill as a bowman, and his arrows emit sonic screams or blow up or emit grappling hooks or things like that. And he is adept at their use. Never made clear where those gimmicks come from. I like the retrofit that says that he just got them from Stark Industry. But whether he did or not, he joins the team, as does the brother and sister team of mutants, the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. The Scarlet Witch can throw reality-altering hexes, and Quicksilver can run really fast. I point out here merely as a fugitive note of pride that he can run not nearly anywhere near as fast as the Flash can run in the DC universe. And the Scarlet Witch's little hex powers pale in comparison to Zatanna in the DC universe. And Hawkeye has a bunch of trick arrows, but he was also trained as an acrobat and a thief and a stumblebum, which means he's not nearly as good an archer as Green Arrow in the DC universe. But we'll leave all of that aside. Now is not the time for Marvel versus DC. Those 3 people join Captain America, and they have adventures. And one of their adventures is when they confront a villain who had confronted the original team, a villain called Kang the Conqueror, who is from the future. And that is his gimmick at first. Stan Lee is very good at introducing villains who are a gimmick villain to start with, and then if he's intrigued by them, or if he has a slow weekend, he will invest them with pathos and nuance later on. but he won't do it originally. And when Kang the Conqueror originally appears, he is just a one-note gimmick. From the future. And that's it. That allows Stan Lee and Jack Kirby or whoever's doing the art to pull all sorts of gimmicks out of their tuchus. Later on, when Captain America's Avengers face Kang, we do get nuance to the character. We get something like a backstory, and the character suddenly doesn't seem like a villain anymore. He'll do villainous things, but it suddenly seems like he's a man tortured by love. He's a man who might be noble. He's a villain far more along the lines of Stan Lee's characterization of the Submariner, who was immensely powerful but couldn't be counted on not to knock down buildings in Manhattan. He couldn't be counted on to be just a good and true superhero. He had his own agenda. But he was still a tortured, noble figure. And that Kang the Conqueror appears when the Avengers issues were still numbering in the teens. And we see a lot more of his future life and a lot more of his motivation. And I read those issues and really enjoyed them. And someone else was reading those issues. A wee little smudgy-faced boy named Kurt Busiek was reading those issues and filing them away and then going off to do whatever. And years and years and years later, he decided that a pivotal figure, not necessarily the villain, but a pivotal non-Avenger figure in the big storyline that he wants to tell would be Kang the Conqueror. And so we get Avengers Forever, where you have a core cast of Avengers, and you also have Kang the Conqueror. But there are more complications to go through before we get to that. Okay, I've already given you the idea of one of the complications, which is that the Avengers timeline moved on. The characters in the Marvel Universe are not static. Stan Lee introduced into superhero comics the ridiculous, poisonous idea that you keep needing to up the ante, that these are real people, that these are real characters, and that the readers somehow want that. So you can't just have a fun adventure that wraps up in one issue and then the next month have a variation on that fun adventure and then just keep doing that for 50 years. No, you can't do that. Instead, you have to keep changing the characters, changing their costumes, the heresy of it all, to having them go through crises of all kinds. That happens in the run of the Avengers. Many, many times, many crises happen. One of the biggest of which is that at one point, Hank Pym disappears. And Janet Van Dyne is very worried. And a new character shows up on the scene called Yellow Jacket. He is not a giant. Hank Pym at this point had altered his biochemical formula so that it wasn't making him only ant size. He could also grow to giant size and call himself Giant Man or Goliath or whatnot. He disappears and another character shows up and he has an oddly insectile code name. He is Yellow Jacket. But he seems to be caustic and sarcastic and maybe even a little evil. He doesn't seem like Hank Pym at all. And it turns out in the course of the story that he is Hank Pym having a dissociative psychological episode. He is having an alternate personality psychological episode in which he thinks he's Yellow Jacket. When he gains his self-awareness back, he goes back to being Goliath, and Yellow Jacket is simply retired as a character, except if Hank Pym wants to dress in that costume and use those powers, which are nominal. Yellow Jacket can't really change his size. He still has the cybernetic circuitry to control insects, and he's installed bioelectric stingers in the gloves of his costume. The same kind that originally the Wasp has. She gets them too, only they eventually become part of her biology, as do her wings. As opposed to Yellow Jacket, it's just technology. He's just a normal man. When you take the cybernetic helmet off and the stingers out of his glove and the wings off his costume, he's just a normal person. But he becomes an episode in the Avengers past. Now, it crops up again in the future. Hank Pym, whenever a writer needs a well to go to in the long, long run of the Avengers, they make him unstable. They make Hank Pym mentally unstable, and he reverts to Yellow Jacket or creates Ultron or whatever it is, whatever unstable thing he's going to do. So yeah, this is not that crisis was not the last time that Yellow Jacket would appear, but he's not the only one who has crises. For instance, there's a gigantic interstellar war between two alien races, the Kree and the Skrull. Again, both of which you now know from Marvel Comics. If you are one of the 10 people who saw Captain Marvel, then you now know about the Kree and the Skrull. In the comic books in the 70s, they have a massive intergalactic war that just happens to involve Earth. It's not really Earth is not the center of things. And the Avengers get themselves involved. And in the course of the Kree-Skrull War, which I'm sure that Michael K. Vaughan and I will be talking about at some point on our Comic Book Wednesdays, in the course of that war, it is revealed that the Kree and the Skrull are both at evolutionary dead ends, but that humans have vast, untapped evolutionary potential. And in order to tip the balance of that whole war, Rick Jones, who just happens to be there, even though he's everybody's idea of a third wheel, he just happens to be there, and he just happens to tap into that nebulous evolutionary potential. And it allows him to project vast amounts of mental psionic energy that he gives shape. He gives shape to that energy by shaping it as superheroes in the comic books that he read as a kid. Some of whom are real people, but he doesn't summon the real people. Instead, he creates energy duplicates of a lot of those heroes: the Finn, the Destroyer, the original Vision, the Red Swimming Trunks, Submariner, and stuff like whatnot. And they fight in a pivotal battle, and just for a few minutes, and then they start to disappear. The cause has been won. Rick Jones loses that ability, and they vanish. And the Kree-Skrull War wraps up soon after that. As a small footnote to the Kree-Skrull War, I want to point out, no offense to Roy Thomas or anybody else, that there's no such thing as an evolutionary dead end. And there's also no such thing as evolutionary potential that's just hanging around inside your body. That is not, there's no such thing as that. I know it's not Roy Thomas's fault. Stan Lee started that comic book misunderstanding of evolution as a thing that happens free of environment. It doesn't. Evolution works hand in hand with environment. It is a direct response to environment. So you can't have a character that just at will accelerates his evolution to some, big-brained future self. You don't know that big brains are going to be in your future because you don't know the environment. Anyway, that is one such massive event, is that in Rick Jones's history, he has the ability to do that for a brief moment. He has that untapped genetic potential inside him. He doesn't get to keep that ability. That would have crossed the line and made him interesting. Instead, he just has it for a key moment in the battle. When the battle's over, suddenly Hawkeye is disillusioned and doesn't want to be part of the Avengers anymore, doesn't want to be Hawkeye anymore, doesn't want to wear the familiar purple costume or anything like that. And he's not the only one. Captain America, in a subsequent adventure in his own comic book, has a version of Watergate. America was going through Watergate. People were disillusioned with the government to an extent that had never been seen before, prior to the American Civil War, and would not be seen again until thousands of people, armed Trump supporters, stormed the capital of my country in order to overthrow the government, nullify a legal election, and execute Trump's sitting vice president. Captain America went through Watergate, and it was reflected in his comics. There was a time when Marvel Comics reflected the news of the day without necessarily taking sides and then going on Twitter and calling anyone on the other side a Nazi. I know that seems unrecognizable now, but once upon a time it was true. Marvel brought up current events in order for them to be reflected in comics as a reflection of the world outside your door, without vilifying half their readership. Captain America goes through that horrible situation, and briefly it completely destroys his faith in his mission as Captain America. It even causes him briefly to abandon his identity as Captain America and become a character tellingly called Nomad. I'm sure, again, that we'll be getting to Nomad, Michael and I will, on our own. I wouldn't be surprised if Avengers Forever doesn't scare Matthew off graphic novels forever. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't actually know his response. I haven't seen his video. But Captain America goes through that kind of upheaval. I don't agree with it. It shouldn't happen. The pattern that held in the 1950s, where Superboy has an adventure one month, then he has an adventure another month, then he has another adventure another month, and nothing changes. That was a fine pattern. There's nothing wrong with that pattern. But Stan Lee's pattern was introduced, and it holds true. Oh my God, it holds true. So you have Bane snapping the neck of Batman's butler and longtime friend Alfred. Just kill him. Just kill Alfred. Have another villain capture Catwoman, extract her heart, and have Batman find her with tubes going into her chest on a heart ventilator. I've got her heart. I've got it right here in a box. You better track it down or else. Yeah, that's a nice, healthy mind frame for a comic book. But again, we're not going to go down that road. We're going to stick to the program. At another point in Captain America's history, the character also undergoes a change. In addition to being disillusioned with the country, at a different point, he undergoes a change where a development in his own comic book changes the super soldier formula inside his body, which originally made him Captain America by making him the peak of physical perfection for a human being. Instead, briefly, for a period in Captain America's history, that formula is changed to give him super strength. He's not invulnerable, he still needs his shield, but he can lift several tons over his head. That, if you go back in time to some Captain America issues, you will see issues where the writers just had to deal with that. That's true also in the Avengers. It's reflected in the Avengers. For a few issues of the Avengers, they have a new superpowered member. That eventually also went away, just like Rick Jones's superpowers, just like Hawkeye's period of disillusionment. Eventually, he goes back to being the gimmick archer with the the bomb arrows and whatnot. I'm getting a little tired giving all this groundwork. As the story of Avengers Forever opens, a team of Avengers. There's the Scarlet Witch. There's the Wasp and Giant Man. There's Iron Man. There's Vance Astrovic as Justice, I think he's called, one of the dumber Avengers. There's his girlfriend, Firestar, who he calls by her civilian name, even when they're in combat against agents of Hydra. He's still talking to her as if they were in the bedroom. Just third string Avengers, stupid, forgettable third string Avengers, but a couple of heavy hitters as well. That team has gone to the blue area of the moon, which was once the home base of the Watcher, an all-powerful celestial character who is forbidden to interfere in the events that he observes in the universe. He had his headquarters on Earth's moon for some reason. But it isn't anymore. As this story opens, it is the headquarters of its S.H.I.E.L.D. installation, which again, thanks to the movies, I don't need to explain what that is. It's a shadowy, all-reaching government association. And it's not just a base of theirs, it's also a jail. And it's a jail for a Kree artifact, an artifact from the alien race called the Kree, from the Kree-Skrull War. And that artifact is a gigantic fat head with tentacles called the Supreme Intelligence, that you can sort of think of as what the 70s writers thought the internet might be like. The Supreme Intelligence is not a biological organism. The Supreme Intelligence is the sum total of the knowledge and archives and presumably the computer activity of the Kree Empire. How the Kree Empire would exist without the Supreme Intelligence, I don't know, but maybe they have more than one. Anyway, the Supreme Intelligence is just hanging out there. He's in prison. He can't do anything. he's a big blob in a tank, but he's hanging out there in this base. The Avengers see him. They don't like him. They have a long history with him. But they're dropping off Rick Jones at this base because I guess all the beds were booked at Johns Hopkins. I tell Walter Reed, I have no idea why they're bringing Rick Jones to the moon that also happens to be a jail for a powerful alien entity. But nevertheless, they do bring Rick Jones there. And they have a few snarky comments with the Supreme Intelligence, and then they leave. But the chamber where Rick Jones is left is not inactive, because suddenly things start to happen in that chamber. A giant being made of solidified time called, you'll never guess, Tempest. He has a club. No idea why. He doesn't have a gun, but he has a club. He shows up to kill Rick Jones, who is in a coma. Why? Okay. Because when Kang the Conqueror, that future villain, is done being Kang the Conqueror, much later in his own future timeline, he becomes a character called Immortus. Still Kang, was Kang when he was a much younger man, who decides, Immortus does, that it will be his job to police the timelines, to keep them nice and clean and orderly. And in order to prevent a horrific timeline in which Rick Jones is the overlord of the universe and has employed shock troops to subjugate all the races of the universe, in order to prevent that perversion of the timeline from happening, Immortus has sent Tempest to kill Rick Jones in his coma. Raise your club, smatter it down, and kill him. Again, why Immortus does this? I have no idea. When Immortus could have slipped into Rick Jones's bedroom and introduced a single air bubble into his veins. He'd die of an embolism, looks like natural causes, none the worse. No destiny war is kicked off. Instead, he sends a giant a giant with a club to kill Rick Jones. And you might think, well, okay, Rick Jones is in a coma. There's no one there except the Supreme Intelligence, who never does anything anyway and couldn't anyway. He is the aforementioned big blob in a tank. But somebody else wants to protect Rick Jones. Somebody wants to stop Immortus from smoothing out the timeline. And who is that somebody else? What's Kang? It's Kang the Conqueror, who shows up to thwart Immortus' plans, and I can already hear you saying, well, wait a minute, if Immortus was Kang, doesn't Immortus know that he once did this? Welcome to the world of Avengers Forever. Kang shows up and is furious with Immortus. And right away you see what I consider to be the greatest part of the whole storyline of Avengers Forever, which is Kurt Busiek's conception of Kang the Conqueror. If Stan Lee deepened and nuanced this character in those teenage issues of the Avengers, what Kurt Busiek does here is amazing. It is an amazing further step. By far, the most interesting thing in this book is Kang the Conqueror. And when he shows up to thwart that plan and stop that giant and save Rick Jones's life, he tells Immortus what his reason is. I don't want to become you. I want a different timeline. I want a different future. I don't want to become some sedentary scrivener, as he's constantly using the word writer as an insult. He's constantly calling Immortus a scrivener or a writer, a bookworm, and saying, I'm a man of action. I am a conqueror. I do not want to become you. So I'm not going to let you intervene in a way that might stop that from happening. And he destroys Tempest, the giant, and he tries to protect Rick Jones, but Immortus has all the legions of time to throw at Kang. Every warrior has ever donned a helmet or a boot or picked up a rifle or a ray gun or a club. Immortus can go into the time stream, snatch all of those people out, and send them in endless waves against Kang the Conqueror. Right there, in the chamber, in the blue area of the moon. Kang knows that it's hopeless. In other words, even though he immediately summons, using his own temporal machinery, he immediately summons futuristic weapons, handheld laser cannons and whatnot, he knows that he's completely outmatched. And so does someone else. You don't think this is ever going to end at this point, do you? It gets worse. It only gets worse from here. The other person who notices that this fight is going on and doesn't want Kang to lose is a character named Libra, who was a thug who joined a super syndicate called, predictably enough, the Zodiac, in which each of the members patterns themselves after one of the current Zodiac signs. Libra, of course, is obsessed with balances. He has the balancing scales as the emblem on his chest back when he is a strapping, spandex-suited supervillain. But the Libra who shows up in Avengers Forever is not that. He is a spindly, old, seedy, monk cloak wearing figure with sandals. But he says that he's Libra, and he wants to restore the balance of this fight. And the way he does that is to touch Rick Jones, who has awoken from his coma, on the back of his neck and summon forth his evolutionary potential that had lain dormant all this time. Rick Jones can't do it himself. But Libra has a more elaborate plan than simply doing what Rick Jones did during the Kree-Skrull War, which was to summon a vast amount of energy and embody it as figures from his imagination. Instead, Libra says more is needed. What we need to do now is summon figures actually plucked from time, so they're not dependent on you, they are people that we are plucking from the time stream. We're going to do what Immortus is doing with all of his time-plucked warriors, only we're going to do it ourselves. So, in conjunction with Libra, Libra frees Rick Jones' superpower in order to do that, to snatch superpowered characters from the past. And Rick Jones sees the vast odds that are against Kang the Conqueror and immediately summons 10 Thors from 10 different periods in time and 10 Hulks from 10 different periods in time. Because he knows that's an effectively unbeatable force. Those 20 characters can hold out against any number of normal human warriors that Immortus can summon from the past. And they do, and balance is restored, except that doesn't happen because Libra and Rick Jones don't do that. They don't summon 10 Thors and 10 Hulks from the past. Instead, they summon our cast of characters for Avengers Forever. Let's go through them, shall we? They summon that disillusioned, powerless Hawkeye. The guy who's just wearing no shirt. He doesn't have any trick arrows. He doesn't have a spandex costume. He doesn't have any explosive arrows, glue arrows, boomerang arrows, sonic arrows. He doesn't have anything like that. He's just a guy who, if you give him a bow and arrow, will be pretty good at it. That's it. That's all. They summon him. They don't summon the super heroic Hawkeye with a whole quiver full of Stark technology arrows. They don't do that. They summon him. They also summon Yellow Jacket. They summon Hank Pym at his most mentally unstable, a character guaranteed to betray the other members of the team. They summon him for some mystical reason, because he's needed to restore the balance. But in addition to summoning Hank Pym as Yellow Jacket, they also summon Hank Pym as Goliath from later on in his life when he remembers having been Yellow Jacket and is deeply ashamed of that period. They summon Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, also from the same period as Goliath. So they both know that another member they know what Yellow Jacket doesn't, since no one can see past the mask here. They know that Yellow Jacket is Hank Pym and that he's deeply mentally unstable. Now, I said no one can see past the mask, but how long would it take you if you were in the room with a version of yourself that cannot be any longer than 10 years in the future, even if you were wearing a mask? I think it'd take you about 5 seconds to realize, but Yellow Jacket never does. They summon, in other words, 2 versions of Hank Pym, one of whom has those bioelectric stingers in the gloves of his suit, and cybernetic ability to communicate with insects if there are any, but otherwise is a biochemist in spandex. He's not all that great an athlete, not all that great a scrapper. They summon Goliath, who can grow to 15 feet, 25 feet, even 35 feet, and gains enormous amounts of strength and invulnerability as he does that. So he is a heavy hitter for the Avengers. They summon the Wasp, only it's not that original Wasp, who was a flighty socialite. Instead, this is a battle-hardened Wasp, whose own biochemical stings are immensely powerful, and she's also has a huge amount of experience leading the team. She's a seasoned professional, in other words. They summon Hawkeye, who's useless, even more useless than he ordinarily would be. You can see Captain America. Yes, they summon Captain America, but do they summon Captain America from most of his timeline? No. No, they summon that disillusioned Captain America from Watergate, who has no leadership ability, the foremost thing that he brings to the Avengers team, but he does have that super strength. It is in that brief period where he is super strong. Busiek mentions it in this first issue, then largely forgets about it, but nevertheless, that's to help you locate Captain America in the continuity, in the back issues, that Busiek assumes you have been reading faithfully and with a microscope for 35 years. If you haven't, none of what I've just said is going to make any sense at all. Barely any of it is explained. And in addition to those 5 characters, 2 more characters are summoned from future Avengers teams, from later than the team that dropped off Rick Jones at the blue area of the moon. We get Janice Marvel, who is the son of Captain Marvel, the original Marvel Comics Captain Marvel. So he himself is partly Kree. He has energy bands on his wrists that are classic MacGuffins. They can do or not do whatever he needs them to do. He has cosmic awareness, which allows him to know what's behind closed doors. He can fly. He has a limited amount of third-rate superpowers, but at least he's in a different class than Yellow Jacket or Hawkeye. And they also summon Songbird, who is from the future. In the present of the Avengers, Janet Van Dyne and Goliath are the only people who are from the Avengers present. And they only know her as a supervillain. At the time when she's on the Avengers, she's a supervillain who has sonic abilities. They're extremely ill-defined. They don't. None of her fellow Avengers ever seem to hear her when she's using her sonic ability. It never seems to affect them. She seems to be able to direct it in a way that really makes it laser technology instead of sound. But she can fly, and she's an energy projector and things like that. It's useful. She's kind of a very, very low wattage Green Lantern in that regard. And this is the team that Libra summons in the spur of the moment using Rick Jones' superpowers. There's Rick Jones right there on the cover, trying to look badass, to help Kang. And Kang immediately sees the Avengers. He recognizes at least some of them and says, "Help me to defend your comrade Rick Jones. Fight alongside me." And it's a good Kang. It's a very good Kang. It's a Kang who says in the second issue that we're reading today, if we get that far, this is why I love the Avengers as enemies. This is why I have always honored you as adversaries, because you're brave, because you fly into battle when you know what's right, even if the odds are against you, just like I do. And for once, it's not braggadocio. For once, it fits with the Kang we're seeing. Wonderful. Just wonderful. And our Avengers do leap into battle and manage to squeak out a kind of a victory so that Immortus has to withdraw, and suddenly they find themselves lost in the time stream. Kang advises them to take Rick Jones out of the time stream so that Immortus can't get at him. And somehow or other, that seems to be something that Libra can do. Keep in mind, this was just a guy wearing spandex. He did not have any superpowers when he was part of the Zodiac team. Now, all of a sudden, he can unleash genetic potential, which, keep in mind, does not exist. And he can also slip between dimensions and out of the time stream completely whenever it suits him. I guess, I suppose. So the Avengers are suddenly thrown into this chaos. And these are Avengers who, have, aside from Goliath and the Wasp, have not generally worked together with each other. They don't know each other all that well. They have a deep amount of suspicion. In the eyes of both Hawkeye and Captain America, or in the eyes of Hawkeye and the Wasp and Goliath, Janice Marvel is deeply suspect. He's just a punk, almost a villain. And Songbird is a villain. Now, they aren't anymore. In the time frame they're taken from, they have become good guys, but in other words, it is an Avengers team that has no cohesion at all. They can launch themselves into battle, but taking orders neatly in a neat twist by Kurt Busiek, taking orders from the Wasp. Captain America is in no position to lead the team. He has no confidence in himself at all. So Wasp immediately steps in and starts giving orders, and they're good orders. People start taking them right away. But this team has no cohesion at all. The Wasp and Goliath don't trust Songbird. They know already not to trust Yellow Jacket. None of these characters know each other. And they also don't know what's going on. They don't know what they're supposed to do. So they've got Rick Jones out of the time stream. So he is safe from Immortus, who wants to kill him. But what do? Just stay out of the time stream forever? They know they can't do that. And the minute they enter it again, Immortus will know where they are and attack them. And that's what happens. They re-enter the time stream, and it gives Busiek the writerly MacGuffin framework to pop these Avengers in and out of all kinds of alternate timelines. Established timelines in the Marvel timeline, but also alternate things that we didn't know that existed, which is going to come up in the course of these issues because we're going to get to see all kinds of time periods in Marvel history and all kinds of iterations of familiar characters in new settings. I want to point out here something that I pointed out at the beginning of another 12-issue series a long time ago that young Kurt Busiek also ate up and loved, and that is Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was a DC event. By this time, DC had already caught the Stan Lee virus, so they were doing events and making all sorts of waves in the continuity. And that also featured a cosmic menace. Here it's something called the Destiny War. Then it was the Anti-Monitor, Anti-M, as one wag referred to it. And then, as here, there's a cosmic figure who has access to all of time and space and who can snatch a select group of heroes from different times and places in order to fight this menace. And in Crisis on Infinite Earths, like clockwork, we get an original team of heroes that is useless. Most of them are useless. If you're fighting a gigantic war and you have the ability to pluck people out of time, you're going to end up plucking the most powerful characters that you can. And that doesn't happen in the first issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths. True, there's a Superman, although he's from a different Earth. He's an alternate Earth Superman. He's the original Superman, so he's in middle age, maybe a little bit past his prime. But there's a naked boy, a teenage boy called Anthro. There's a talking gorilla. There's a minor pyrokinetic who gets tired after very little exertion. It's a useless team. And I knew when I bought that first issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths that sooner or later you're going to call in the mainstream Superman, the mainstream Wonder Woman, several A-list powerhouses from the Legion of Superheroes. Sooner or later you're going to do that. Captain Marvel, the whole Marvel family, Supergirl. You're going to do that. You know you are. This original team, ridiculous. The only difference here is that we're stuck with this original team, at least until it becomes important, and then that changes. But for now, this has gone on quite long enough. I'm going to wrap up. That is the premise for Avengers Forever. It took a whole video just to give you the premise. The main draw point that I want to show you here is the artwork. the artwork here is amazing. This is Carlos Pacheco just doing the work of a lifetime. Here, for instance, is a great double-page spread of Kang fighting off those warriors from different time periods. Look at the detail in there. That is just amazing. Look at the coloring choice here to have muted colors here so that Kang can have the colors. There's the Supreme Intelligence floating in his vat in the background. But this is a Kang that we get who will not give up, who will not stop fighting against his future self, who he scornfully refers to, look at this panel, writers. Pah! as Immortus summons warriors from the past to fight. And Libra causes Rick Jones to summon these Avengers. These are our Avengers. There's Songbird. There's Useless Hawkeye. There's Janice Marvel. There's Yellow Jacket. The Goliath and the Wasp. There's our disillusioned Captain America. And when Kang tells them, Avengers, take action swiftly, they do. They launch themselves into action. At the Wasp, with the Wasp leading, they launch themselves into action and figure, we'll figure it out later. But we want to save Rick Jones's life. We want to help Kang even though he's our enemy. So let's fly into battle. And they do. And look at that. That is just incredible. And later on, in the third issue that we are trying to understand this time around, they launch themselves into battle against the forces of Immortus. And the panel work is every bit as beautiful. Look at that. That is just epic comic book artwork. Just epic. What Hawkeye thinks he's going to do against spaceships, I have no idea. What Yellow Jacket thinks he's going to do. But nevertheless, look at the detail. Look at that. It's just amazing. And that runs throughout. That runs throughout this graphic novel. It's Carlos Pacheco's best work. It's just the writing that we have to keep up with. And if you thought that summary was bad, wait until the storyline goes on. Because, yes, Kang becomes Immortus. But they both took time out to become an ancient Egyptian pharaoh named Rama-Tut. And along the way, maybe they were both Dr. Doom. Or maybe only one of them was. All right. We'll take it in baby steps. So we will resume this next week when I continue trying to make sense of this for a non-continuity buff. Now, I'm not meaning to mock Avengers Forever in any way. I was one of those continuity wonks who had been studying every issue of the Avengers, reading it over and over again every month until the next issue comes out. Since the beginning, I was one of those readers. I felt the immense compliment that this is to me. It's Michael and Matthew that I'm worried about, not me. But we will resume this happy little read along next week. Thank you, BookTube.